everyone, I'm the Blood Guy. Welcome back to another review of a serial killer documentary. And yes, it is another Dahmer piece. I know I've been doing a lot of Dahmer documentaries and films lately, but we just got Tubi, and I saw there was a handful on there, and there was also a couple films I wanted to cover, so I just figured I'd get them all done at once. Now, I said I've already done all the Dahmer films that have been made. That is true, but there is another 2019 micro-budget shot-on-video film called The Cannibal Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. I may look into that. It's not really at the top of my list. Of all the documentaries out there of Dahmer, there was only two other ones that I was thinking about doing. I did say I wasn't going to be doing like series like Born to Kill or World's Most Evil, because each episode is pretty much a documentary. I was going to look at standalone ones, but the closest I would go to that would be A&E Biography and Mind of a Monster, because I think those are some of the best ones made. So I will get to those of Dahmer. The A&E one is called The Monster Within. So at some point I'll get to those, but for right now, this will be the last Dahmer documentary. I've done all the films, and this is one from 2019. It's one I've been meaning to do for a while. I actually watched this, I think, 2 weeks ago. I've actually already filmed the second part of the review where I go through what it covers. That's already very long, so I'm going to try to make this part as short as possible. So this came out in 2019, and it's Jeffrey Dahmer, Killer Cannibal. Now, it's on Tubi, but it's not a Tubi original. It's actually from Reels. And that's good because from what I've gathered, because I've already watched, I think, 3 Tubi originals, I would probably say Tubi is at the bottom. As of right now, I don't have Peacock yet, so I don't know what those ones are like. I've heard those ones are really good. But, I'd put Netflix up here, some other ones, and honestly, the ones I've watched from Tubi have not been that great. They're basically just a bullet point documentaries, just kind of going over the bare essentials of serial killers with a couple people involved and some true crime podcasters. This one is set up similarly as far as who the talking heads are. We get Dr. Fred Berlin, who was he's a forensic psychiatrist. He was the expert key witness for the defense in Dahmer's trial. There's Shirley Lynn Scott, who's a true crime writer. She's kind of our main speaker, our main talking head throughout the whole piece. I believe prosecutor Michael McCann is in it. And then there's assorted, there's the usual Pamela Bass. I think Mike Cockrell is not in it, but sort of the typical people that's in a lot of these Dahmer documentaries. Now, one thing I said way back when I did the Jeffrey Dahmer files is because there's so many Dahmer documentaries. I've already reviewed a bunch of them. I will still say that the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes is still my favorite one. I still think that this is the best one. Since there's so many, what will help these documentaries stand apart from each other? Like Jeffrey Dahmer Files is only about his arrest and trial, with just Pat Kennedy, Pamela Bass, and the medical examiner, only talking heads. So that stands out. Some of the other ones kind of fall by the wayside. So what is it about this one, Jeffrey Dahmer, Killer Cannibal, that can help it stand out on its own? And it kind of does. It does have an interesting approach to it, and that is, this is a complete psychoanalysis of every aspect of Dahmer's life, from birth all the way up until death. Again, with those talking heads. Literally every aspect, like his double hernia surgery. What did that do to him? Possibly. How? Why? He was a class clown in high school. Possibly why? How come? Where was he mentally? And why was he doing that? Teenage alcoholism. What was he trying to cover up? you know, closet homosexuality as a teen. What did that do to him psychologically? First kill at 18, 9-year span, breaks down all the uh, substitutes for trying not to kill. Like the mannequin, drugging men at bathhouses, uh, attempting to grave rob. And really getting into it psychologically, trying its best anyway, because honestly, we're never going to understand uh, how Dahmer worked, why Dahmer did what he did. But this does attempt every little aspect of, okay, this is why. This is possibly what he was thinking. Psychologically, this is what all these things represent. When he started collecting skulls and body parts. 8th victim, Raymond Smith, starts cannibalizing. 11th victim, Errol Lindsey. That's when he starts doing his zombie experiments. And what psychologically, what that escalation means and represents, that's the angle of this documentary. So it's not so much just a chronological timeline of events that happen, with every once in a while a psychiatrist talking head kind of explaining some things. This tries to break down psychologically every significant event. Or, well, actually, the significance varies, whether it's him being a class clown or each of escalation of his crimes. So, in that aspect, it's very, very interesting. And for anyone that says that they now know everything about Dahmer, even I learned a couple things from this documentary. So, if someone who has read as many books as I have, seen as many documentaries as I have, for it to still have a couple little nuggets of information that even I didn't know, then I'm sure there'll be some stuff for anyone else to pick up. So that's also good. I'll explain what those things are in the second part of the review. Now, it does have its negatives. It is very dramatization heavy, like a lot of Dahmer documentaries. Once we get out of high school, between that and his arrest, it's very dramatization heavy because there's not really any footage or photos really of that period. So it's very dramatization heavy. And like other documentaries, it does get pretty repetitive, especially once we really get into the peak of his kills, where it pretty much just says the date, name of the victim, how he was lured, how he was killed, what was done with his body, kind of where Dahmer is psychologically, and then a rinse and repeat. And that's kind of the formula for much of the later part of the documentary, is that it does get very, very repetitive, especially during the peak of his kills. Another thing that gets very repetitive is you can always tell when we come back from a commercial break, because it always opens with the same, the narrator saying, Jeffrey Dahmer, serial killer, cannibal, the subject of films like Dahmer starring Jeremy Renner. It has that same opening every single time, so that kind of gets a bit repetitive. I probably should have said this in the beginning. It's 2 episodes, 2 hour-and-a-half episodes. Is just over 3 hours, so it's a very good chunk of documentary, roughly around the same length as Jeffrey Dahmer tapes. I would say this is up there. It does feel like a Tubi original, just because of the limited talking heads. It really is carried by Shirley Lynn Scott, the true crime writer. Mostly her and Dr. Fred Berlin. They're the ones that kind of carry it the most. And then I would say prosecutor Michael McMahon talks probably second most. I do commend them for trying to psychologically break down each event, because Dahmer is one of the most psychological anomalies in true crime. We're never going to understand stuff about his mind. So I think this one makes the best attempt at trying to do that. Uh, all, there's actually three doctors. There's another one called, is her name Shirley Jin? Her, her last name's Jin. That's right. You'll hear me say it in the second part. But so I would still say the Dahmer tapes is still my favorite. But I do commend this one for not just being another chronological telling of his life and crimes, kind of like a Tubi one. Uh, there were some things I learned, like some aspects of some of his kills were things I actually did not know. There's definitely going to be some stuff in here that people did not know beforehand. I mean, if there's stuff that I learned, I'm sure there will be stuff that someone else will pick up. It didn't really feel boring well, I shouldn't say boring because I've never seen a boring Dahmer documentary. Even Fresh Meat, the Tubi original, which I would put at the bottom, is still not boring. I would just say it's not the best made. Um, it the worst thing it has going for it is that it does fall into the trap of kind of being a repetitive towards the end of his spree. But they all kind of get that way. Uh, I have noticed kind of back to watching all these documentaries back to back. Yes, there is a lot of the same information. It does kind of go to the same beats and everything. I think Fresh Meat is really the only one that had kind of wrong information or messed up information. It didn't really have anything that conflicted with anything else that I've read or seen. Maybe a couple tiny details, which you'll hear me say in the next part. So this is one that's definitely worth checking out. I would say this might be the third best Dahmer documentary I've seen. I put Tapes as number one. I put Dahmer Files as number two because I think that's one that really stands on its own, very different, really warrants being made. I would say either this or Dahmer on Dahmer is probably the third best. Uh, Even though Dahmer on Dahmer felt like a more condensed version of this, uh, yeah, I'd probably say this one is third, then Dahmer on Dahmer, because this one has the whole uh, uh, psycho. Sorry, I don't know why I'm stuttering so bad today. Because this one has the psychoanalysis and more so than others, and that's really the hook that keeps it very interesting. So I didn't want to go on for almost 15 minutes about it, but very good, very well made. It does get kind of repetitive, especially with the intro after each commercial break. There are no commercials on Tubi, but and it is very dramatization heavy, which I'm not the biggest fan of dramatizations. I do like it when it's subtle, like in this, but this one wasn't as bad as say Fresh Meat. So well made, good speakers on it, and I really do commend the attempt to try to break down everything uh, psychologically. And of course, it's not definite answers. I would probably take what like Dr. Fred Berlin and Dr. Jin say. The true crime writer, I commend her for her. I would kind of take that as theories because that's what all we're ever going to have about Dahmer is theories. So well made, very interesting. I do commend it for having that angle. That's definitely the hook. So it's a Reels original, but it's on Tubi, so you can check that out. So now we'll get into the, I apologize, long part of the next video where I go over what it covers. And because every small thing tries to have a psychological explanation, it's going to make this kind of lengthy because I thought everything was worth noting. So now we'll get into that. Jeffrey Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, is one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Between June 1978 and July 19, 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys ranging in age from 14 to 33. After being lured to his home, he would drug his victims, strangle them, take Polaroids, practice necrophilia, and then dismember them, keeping body parts around his apartment, such as skulls, whole heads, skeletons, hands, genitalia, and even stored their meat for consumption. His crimes were a gradual progression. He didn't practice necrophilia right away, and he did not engage in cannibalism until his eighth victim, Ernest Miller, and starting with his 11th victim, Errol Lindsay, he would drill into their skulls and pour acid or hot water into their brain, hoping to render them into submissive sex zombies. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee on May 21st, 1960, to chemist Lionel Dahmer and a stay-at-home mother, Joyce. His brother David was born when Jeff was 6. As a child in the Bath Township of Ohio, Jeff was known to be emotionally distant, withdrawn, and only showing interest in collecting and dissecting roadkill and other dead animals. He was a teen alcoholic shortly after realizing he was gay and having no one to talk to about it, and enduring his parents' constant fights. And he was a class clown and graduated high school in 1978. It was that summer Dahmer's parents finally divorced, and he claimed his first victim, 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, who was a hitchhiker. He then had short stints at Ohio State, the Army, and living in Miami, all cut short due to his drinking. From 1981 until 1990, Jeff lived with his grandmother, Catherine, in West Allis, Wisconsin. During this time, Dahmer worked at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, starting in 1985. Then he discovered the gay bars and was soon blacklisted from the gay bathhouses for drugging and leaving the men there after his assault on them. This led to him taking men to hotels, and it was at the Ambassador Hotel he killed his second victim, Stephen Tuomi, on either September 15th or November 20th, depending on the source, of 1987. This is what kicked off his official murder spree. He was arrested for numerous sex-related crimes in 1981 for drunken disorderly conduct, 1982 for indecent exposure at a Wisconsin fair, 1986 for lewd and lascivious behavior for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys, and again in 1988 for luring a 13-year-old to pose for photographs. While living at his grandmother's, he killed 3 more young men. After moving into the Oxford apartments in 1990, he killed 12 more victims and began his cannibalism and making his macabre abattoir. One of his victims at this time, 13-year-old Laotian boy Konrad Sentasophone, which was on May 27, 1991, was actually the younger brother of the boy Dahmer molested in his 1988 charge. On July 22, 1991, his to-be 18th victim, Tracy Edwards, escaped his apartment and flagged down police. When they got back to apartment 213, they found his Polaroids and a head in the refrigerator, immediately arresting him. This led to a media explosion, and Dahmer became one of the most infamous killers. He was found guilty of 16 of the 17 murders and sentenced to 999 years. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer and fellow inmate Jesse Anderson were beaten to death by another inmate, Christopher Scarver. In the years since his arrest and death, there have been countless documentaries, books, films, and even a comic book made about him. Jeffrey Dahmer-related artifacts have become some of the most sought-after murderabilia. And so I'll go into everything that this documentary covers, and this is probably going to be another long one, so I apologize for that. But this one goes in depth with pretty much every aspect of Dahmer's life from birth till death, and tries to do, like I said, like a psychological explanation of everything. So there was a lot to take notes on, so this is probably going to be another longer one, so bear with me. But episode 1 is called Roots of Rage. The intro mentions cannibal, zombie maker, serial killer, focus of many movies and TV. Shows the clip of Rita Isbell yelling, "Jeffrey!" Photos and footage of him, and then the audio reenactment of a 1991 interview where he says, "Nightmare even before I was caught," or his life was a nightmare even before he was caught. And that's the thing, you can always tell when a commercial break ends, because it has that same intro, like, Jeffrey Dahmer, cannibal, serial killer, focus of many movies, like Dahmer, with starring Jeremy Renner. That happens every time we come back from a commercial. So that's the intro. And we keep cutting back to the reenactment of the 1991 interview. It's very similar to this, although I'd say this is still uh, way better. Uh, but from this one particular interview, and it's all reenacted for whatever reason. But we cut to July 22nd of 91, Milwaukee. Tracy Edwards escaping, getting police. It shows that whole dramatization. Uh, how cops went back. They could smell the smell. They find the Polaroids and the head in the fridge. We're introduced to Pamela Bass, his neighbor, on Jeff shrieking like a werewolf, as she put it. All this is dramatized. Even the Polaroids that shows his mugshot. Footage of evidence being taken out, sort of the usual stuff. So then, who is Jeffrey Dahmer? What drove him to murder, necrophilia, and cannibalism? So we cut all the way back to 1960, Milwaukee. We're introduced to Shirley Lynn Scott, who's a true crime writer. She's kind of our main talking head throughout all of this. She's kind of the main speaker. She talks about Lionel and Joyce, their differences of personality, her difficult pregnancy, and large amount of medications. I don't remember if it says, but yeah, she was taking like 27 pills a day. May 21st, Jeffrey is born. Dr. Sherry Jin, who's a psychologist, she pops up now and then. Excuse me. She goes into postpartum depression and it not being very well known back then. Jeffrey being sick with infections and needing injections. His double hernia surgery at age 4 in Ames, Iowa, and how this possibly could have traumatized him. Which I know in A Father Story, Lionel talks about that as well. Because after that, he's shy, withdrawn, and disturbed by loud fights at home. Enjoys listening to David in Joyce's womb or stomach. And the time when he was 6, oh, now this thing's getting all screwed up. The time when he was 6, which I always thought Lionel said he was 4, which is when Lionel dug the dead animal from underneath the house, found all the bones, put the bones in the pail, it clanked, he liked the sound, said, like fiddlesticks. I always thought Lionel said he was 4 when that happened. I guess it was 6. Jeffrey finally interested in something. Dr. Jin on Joyce, laying medicated in bed. Lionel always at work. And then when they're together, they fight. And the anxiety that can cause and the loneliness. Especially if one blames themselves, which it goes into. Jeff's safe haven being the shed with his animal and chemical experience. For him, it was a place to hide, do what he wanted, and not be judged. How he would do things to get reactions out of people, since he can't get anything out of his own mother or parents at home. His class clown antics. How that was his way of making people laugh at him or think he was weird on his own terms. So instead of being bullied and sort of them finding ways to pick on him, he's sort of giving them ammunition, like he's in control of that. It does mention the Honor Society photo, his drinking, and that possibly being that he realized he's gay and has no one to talk about it or to understand it. Also makes it sound like he's already fantasizing about dead bodies. I always thought at that point it was just submissive partners. But the more documentaries I see and the more I've read, it does sound like it was, at least at this time, it was submissive partner, and then gradually dead bodies, even when he was in high school. So audio of the 91 interview reenactment saying he has no answers as to why it started, or if he did know and beforehand he never would have done it. I'm sorry, I think some of this did autocorrect without me seeing it, so I'm kind of confused myself. 1975, Bath Township, Ohio. It goes into the jogger and his fantasies about the jogger that would run by his house. November of 77, Joyce and Lionel file for divorce. Lionel moves out. Summer 78, Jeff graduates. Joyce moved away. Says she begged Jeff to come with her, but he refused. That's different than everything I've heard. I heard that she just took David and left, and Jeff was kind of like, where are you going? I have graduation, and she just blew him off. So that's a little different. Him being left alone in the house, finally alone with his fantasies and his feelings of abandonment. June 18th of 78, Dahmer's first victim, Stephen Hicks. It poses the question of, did he see everything he wanted to be in Stephen, or was it because he was hitchhiking shirtless and he was attracted to him? Dahmer said he had a hitchhiker fantasy, and all the pieces were laid out for it to become a reality when he saw Hicks. That's actually my note, because it posed that question. Did he see what he wanted to be, or was it because he was attracted to him? And then I do remember him saying, in actually both Stone Phillips and the Nancy Glass interview, he had always had a hitchhiker fantasy. It's when Hicks says he has to leave that he kills him, mentions all the feelings of abandonment, and this being the last straw. Now he has a fixation of finding someone who will never leave him. It goes into how the dissection and dismemberment was a fascination for him as well. It does compare to how he did the same with dead animals, and now he's escalated to humans. It goes into his pullover by the police, how he was able to talk his way out of it. But after that part of him kind of went dormant for 9 years. We're introduced to Fred Berlin, who is a psychologist, and I believe he was the key expert witness for the defense during Dahmer's trial. Dahmer being conflicted from that moment on, wanting to fulfill his necrophilic fantasies, but also not wanting to kill. September 78, Columbus, Ohio. He attends Ohio State, drops out after one semester, goes into how Lionel blames drinking and tries to get him away from booze and straighten out. January 12th, 79, at Anniston, Alabama. Dahmer in the Army. Shows footage of basic training. I don't know if that was the place he went to or just some basic footage or video of basic training. He excels, no booze, diet, and working out. Trains as a combat medic, which he enjoys. July 3rd of 79, he's sent to West Germany with photos of him from that time, including one of him passed out, which I think that might actually be from him at Ohio State. I see it pop up during both segments in quite a few documentaries. Dr. Berlin on how, when he realized how more and more different he was from people, he got depressed and fell back into drinking. March 3rd of 81, he's discharged due to alcohol. Dr. Berlin on his alcoholism being part due to his struggle of dealing with his dangerous sexuality, but it could also be his inability to be openly gay for a number of reasons, which that was a note that I put, because I also think, if I remember correctly, that was also part of why he drank so much. December 81, West Allis moves in with Grandma Catherine, so it kind of skips right over his time in Miami just before that. Moves in with Grandma Catherine. Goes into how she was the only person that showed him real love and affection, stability, and kept him tethered to humanity. He did chores, went to church, minimized his drinking. January of 85, he's hired at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. It goes into how he tried to be good for Grandma, including ignoring his homosexual urges, and how a proposition at the local library, which not too many documentaries go into this, but he was at the local library once, and this guy slid him a note offering him oral sex in the bathroom, and Jeff refused. But how that interaction led to his downfall, because after that, he declined. He declined, but it flooded all the memories of everything that he had up to that point. He starts drinking again, going to gay bookstores, bars, and bathhouses. It goes into the mannequin, what that represents: a compliant, submissive partner who won't leave, and he won't have to worry about killing or initiating a relationship. But it's shattered when Grandma finds it and urges him to get rid of it. Uh, this is the closest to another telling of the mannequin story I've seen. Almost everyone is, uh, almost every documentary and movie I see, the telling of the mannequin segment is told differently. This is the only one that's actually quite similar to another telling. Uh, I think in an interview I've actually seen with Dahmer, he didn't know who threw it away. He suspects Lionel, but goes into how Jeff now sees his grandmother, who was once the pillar of unconditional love in his life, as someone of judgment, and may actually abandon him as well because of his feelings and urges. Goes into his grave robbing attempt, how he wanted to dig up a freshly buried body, use that to satisfy his urges, again without killing, but of course how that didn't work. 1986 Milwaukee, his next step in trying to find a substitute, drugging men at bathhouses, again to get submissive, compliant partners with no needs and without killing. But he leaves them alone after. One man OD'd, but he lived, so that leads to Dahmer being blacklisted and banned. Audio reenactment of the 91 interview talking about the mannequin. November 21st of 87, when his next step is drugging men at a hotel, he commits his second murder, 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi. Now, I've always seen September 15th and November 20th. I guess it depends on whatever it is you're reading. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think both these books, each one has a different date. This one, it goes with November 20th. Actually, it goes with November 21st, but his death, the murder, how he lost control after 9 years, how it could be years of buildup of attraction, anger, and rage, trying to suppress his sexuality and urges, and now he's no longer trying to control himself. 2 months later, 14-year-old James Dockstader, how it goes into how he killed him, mentions how he possibly targeted a 14-year-old as he's young and not a threat, not specifically attracted to a 14-year-old. He just saw it as an easier opportunity. Dr. Berlin on how he got up and had breakfast with Grandma the next day, so he's probably still conflicted. Be good and do good, yet also unable to control himself. He kept the body for a week. It started to smell. She called Lionel. He found the jars of brown liquid, which I don't think this I knew. And it was rationalized as, because it did mention how he said he's continuing his animal experiments. So Lionel saw it as, he's still doing that. He did it as a kid. Kind of weird, but it makes sense that that's what he's doing, that's what that is. Goes into how this is his need of intimacy, needing a dead body, strangles them, keeps them, disposes them, and then goes to look for a new relationship. Because to him, this is a relationship. March 24th, 88, 23-year-old Richard Guerrero shows a photo of him, how his $50 offer for photos ruse works with younger, more poor victims. When he strangles them and cuddles them, it's like cuddling with someone who has chosen to stay. Again, these are some of the psychiatrists saying this. Or, I think this is Shirley Lynn Scott, the true crime writer, saying all this. He keeps the skull. This is the first time he kept something. His family looks for him. It goes into his routine of trolling the bars on his way to work, and then picking out a victim on a Saturday night, kill them while Grandma is asleep, and then dismember and dispose while she's at church on Sunday. Goes into Ronald Flowers, the 25-year-old, the following week. The photo is not of him because for all the victims, it shows a photo. This one, it doesn't show the real Ron Flowers. It shows the actor playing him in the dramatization. He's the one whose car broke down, took him back to Grandma's, gave him coffee with sleeping pills. Grandma calls down. It goes into Flowers being in complete red flag mode, but he still managed to get drugged. April 5th of 88, he wakes up at the hospital, told he was found OD'd in a field without a bracelet, a necklace, and $200. His underwear was inside out, which I heard and read that he was dropped off by Dahmer at the hospital and then left him there. So, audio of the 91 interview, audio reenactment of the 91 interview on how when there's no accountability and thinking that you can hide your activities, it can lead to anything. How Flowers went to the police, they go to Dahmer, but he convinces them his story. But from there, he's urged to move out by Lionel. They hint that his possible homosexuality is the reason. You know, not only bringing strange men over to Grandma's house, but yeah, they think that even just the possibility that he might be gay was too much for them to handle. So it goes into that, and then of course the smell and the experiments. September 25th of 88, he moves into his own apartment. Now he's alone. This actually made things worse. It mentions his obsession with The Exorcist and Star Wars movies, which it uses the plural, so maybe it's just not being specific, but it was Return of the Jedi and Exorcist 3. But the very next day, he lured Somsak, sent the Som phone, which this is probably the only thing I've seen other than the Ryan Murphy Netflix series to actually use the name Somsak. Normally they just say 13-year-old boy, and then when they talk about Contract, they say that they're brothers. But here they actually say Somsak. But the photo is of the actor in the dramatization. It doesn't show the real Somsak. It doesn't go into how far it went with those two. Just when the photos started to get sexual, but mentioned how he let the 13-year-old leave, which other sources will say that he escaped. But says maybe in his mind the $50 that he gave him will buy his silence, or the fact that Somsak and his family are immigrants. The police either won't listen or won't take them seriously or won't even bother looking into it. It says how they missed Guerrero's skull as it was painted, and Dahmer did that to make them look plastic or fake. That may be the result. But I thought he painted them as part of his altar, because here it says he's been painting skulls all along. It shows his 1982 mugshot, because it was supposed to show his 88 mugshot, because this is when he got arrested for that sexual misconduct to the 13-year-old, but they show the 82 mugshot of when he exposed himself at the fair. January 30th of 89, he's charged. It goes into this being when his family finds out about his homosexuality, so this is when they know for sure. And the double whammy, it was for Lionel. Like, my son is gay, but he also did this to a child. But how to him, the alcohol is still the major issue, and urges the judge to send him to a prison AA or some sort of psychological help, but that never happens. Dr. Berlin on how if there were more help programs for people like Dahmer with confused or perverted sexual desires, it would be a major help. March of 89, Dahmer moves back in with Grandma. While awaiting his sentence, he kills again. Tony Sears, it shows the actual photo of him. How he, more than anything, fears a rejection. He felt it by his parents, longs for any kind of companionship, but lacks the social skills, so this is his only option. And even how loving couples sometimes eventually, I think this was Shirley Lynn Scott saying this, like eventually someone has to leave the house for whatever reason. But for Dahmer, even that is too upsetting for him. Like that's how deeply disturbed he is about being left or abandoned. Like even someone just leaving to go to work, like that drives him to kill. March 26th of 89, Easter Sunday, he dismembers his fifth victim, Tony Sears. He found Tony so attractive, he called a taxidermist on how to preserve flesh. Put the saved parts, which was his head and his genitals, in acetone. He keeps them in a lockbox, but takes the head to work to keep him close. His disturbed thinking is that they'll live through body parts through him. Basically, they'll live through the body parts that he saves and live on through him. I kind of weirded this wrong, and then the autocorrect kind of screwed me up, so I apologize for that. I really should proofread these first. May 23rd of 89, he's sentenced to a year with work release and 5 years probation for Somsack at the House of Corrections in Franklin, Wisconsin. March 3rd of 90, he's released after 10 months. It mentions how his grandmother was said to have noticed a change in him as if he was dead inside. May 14th of 90, this is when he finally moves into the Oxford apartments. Audio of the 91 interview reenactment on how quiet and easy the neighborhood was and to take chances. Shirley Lynn Scott on how it's possible Dahmer was assaulted in prison instead of committing the act himself, how this might have brought him back to when his body wasn't his own and he was invaded. I'm guessing she meant she was talking about the hernia, the double hernia surgery when he was 4. But now in room 213, he will have complete control. Pamela Bass, his neighbor, on how that was a neighborhood where people did whatever they wanted. Police rarely came by. Nobody notices anybody's business. And how she became friends with Jeff. She was the first one to speak to him, and they would even get together and have a beer together at her apartment or his. May 20th of 91, 33-year-old Raymond Smith shows a real photo of him, brings him back, drugs, strangles, and then poses the body and poses and photographs the body, dismembers, flushes unneeded parts. Pamela, on noticing how men went in his apartment but didn't come out. His probation officers and therapists notice his neglect of hygiene and appearance and increasingly disturbed mind. June 14th of 90, his 7th victim, Edward Smith, shows a real photo. How his disappearance went noticed in the gay community. People knew him. They noticed other men were missing. Smith's sister, Caroline, putting up flowers, and how someone called her saying, "Stop looking, he's dead, I killed him." But then Shirley Lynn Scott goes into how it doesn't seem like Dahmer, as he stays private and doesn't harass victims, police, or families, or even like to inflict pain, but could be a morbid progression of his penchant for pranks that he had in high school. Pamela Bass on him becoming more distant and yelling while he's home alone. The 91 audio reenactment saying he looked at people as objects of pleasure rather than human beings. It goes into his collecting skulls is no longer enough. He wants more control, unity, and feeling like they'll never leave. So Dahmer progresses to cannibalism. September 20th of 90, 23-year-old Ernest Miller, his 8th victim, first to be cannibalized. How he was a busboy from Chicago. He wanted to be a dancer. So Dahmer's money for photos catches his interest. First and only victim to have his throat slit. Now, the detail that goes into here, I actually did not know. Uh, Dahmer only had 2 sleeping pills, as opposed to his usual 7 that he would give his victims. Uh, so, how he doesn't like the idea of slitting a throat, which he thought would be a painful death, but out of desperation to keep him, because he was so attracted to Smith and didn't want to risk losing him, and he didn't have enough sleeping pills, he did what he felt he had to do, which is to slit his throat. He takes photos of the dismemberment process, contorts the body to extenuate the chest, which was, he always said, was his favorite part of the body. Then commits cannibalism with a bicep. Apparently tastes like filet mignon. How he, I should have put where that quote came from because I don't remember who said it, but how he feels unity with the victim, paints the skulls to look fake and plastic so he can keep them out in the open, even have others admire them, and compares this to his high school pranks as well. September 24th of 90, 22-year-old David Thomas, real photo. How they met at the mall, he offered money, but finds him not as attractive when he gets him back home. So he dismembers him, but he doesn't save or consume anything of Thomas. Mentions his shrine, or his altar, his area to be with the victims and be close to them, and how they have to be attracted, to him. So to him, David Thomas did make the cut, apparently. February 18th of 91, it goes into 17-year-old Curtis Strouder, shows the real photo, Dahmer's $50 offer for photos, entices him as his family cut him off for being gay. So he was struggling, strangles and keeps the head of his 10th victim. March of 91, after 5 years of no communication, he calls his mother Joyce, who at this time is in Fresno, California, as an AIDS counselor, and she tells him she knows about and accepts his homosexuality. Despite being accepted and finally feeling a connection with not just someone, but his mother, it actually triggers an escalation in his murders. And that is where episode 1 ends. And now we come to episode 2, which is called Zombie Experiments. Starts off by recapping everything from the first episode from Stephen Hicks all the way up until that phone call between Joyce and Jeff. That was at the end of the last episode. So we go to April 7th of 91, the murder of Errol Lindsey. It shows a real photo of him, but it looks different than how all the others in the timeline looked. It's been a while since I watched it, so I didn't put how it looked different, but for some reason it does. Talks about how he was on his way to have a key made from his mother's house when he fell for the "I'll pay you for photos" ruse. And then it goes into how this is the first victim in which Dahmer performed his sex zombie experiment. So it was actually so it was Errol Lindsey, the 11th victim, that he first did that experiment. Which it does go into what exactly the zombie experiment is, which is drilling through their skull into their brain, injecting some sort of muriatic acid solution into their brain, hoping to kill all motor functions so that they're barely alive, just very submissive, docile, still, but still alive. So Shirley Ann Scott on how Dahmer is always on the hunt for control and how he can have more control, not by killing his victims, but by keeping them as corpses, but alive and rendering them pretty much useless and helpless. It doesn't fully work, so he gives another dose of acid, this time killing him. He dismembers him, keeps his skull and some of his skin. How people in the community started noticing the disappearances, flyers go up, shows some news articles of fear in the gay community. Pamela Bass on being handed a flyer by a victim's brother, who was told that he was a runaway and how nothing could be done, and her telling him, "Oh, I saw him with Jeff," but nothing ever came of it. So then May 24th of 91, the murder of Tony Hughes shows a real photo of him. It goes into him being deaf, but he was a driven, happy person. He moved to Madison, but he would visit his family on weekends. I believe this is the one that said he moved to Madison even because of all the disappearances in the area. And on one of these weekends, he meets Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, it says they knew each other for a couple years. I always heard it was around a year. It just mentions friendship, not really a relationship, which some people have said relationship. Some people have said that Hughes even had Jeffrey Dahmer in his address book. So it varies from source to source on how long they knew each other and how closely they knew each other. This one just happens to say that they were friends. But anyway, he's strangled, kept in his bedroom for 3 days, and then he's dismembered. It does go into how this could either be stupid, reckless, or overly confident of Dahmer, since people knew that they were close, or that they at the very least knew each other. Pamela Bass on how the police did take the neighborhood seriously, seeing the neighborhood as sort of that's just the way they are kind of attitude. She said that she heard one cop even call the people in the area disgusting. Like, you people in this area are disgusting. It was known to be a very rundown, crime-ridden area. Also goes into the smell in the building and confronting Jeff about it, but him not being concerned. This was also Pamela Bass saying that. His neighbors would also hear sawing, drilling, and hammering until early hours of the morning. Pamela Bass on offering to help clean his apartment so people wouldn't complain to the landlord. And seeing blood in his deep freeze, but him saying that he wraps his own meat, and her believing that excuse. Then we get audio of the actual 911 call from Nicole Childress about Konarak sent the cell phone. It shows a real photo of him. States that at this point he's continuing to escalate and get sloppy. How he offers him money to pose. It goes into how Konarak and Somsak are brothers. How the family fled from Laos to avoid the prejudice and prosecution that was going on over there, only to become victims of, I think it says something like a very American nightmare, which is that of the serial killer. May 26th of 91. A lot of sources will say the 27th is when Konarak was killed. They did meet during the evening of the 26th, so that is correct. Drugs him, does his zombie experiment, and then leaves for a bar. It goes into the whole escape, him being essentially drugged and lobotomized via acid. How he escaped. Nicole Childress and her cousin, Sandra Smith, found him outside, called the police. Police didn't do anything, let him back inside, left him with Dahmer, and then he was killed. Just like any other documentary, it does go into detail about his death and the whole thing with the cops. But it does. We get more of the 91 audio reenactment of being afraid at that very moment. Now it says May 27th. The call was around 3 a.m. So it shows more of the call. Now it says May 27th. It does go into how they just brought him inside the apartment, did do a search. Tony Hughes' body was still on the floor in the bedroom. It does talk about, although it does mention that they noted the smell when they went over, but then they left. It does play the actual call to dispatch, uh, and about oh, and about getting deloused. So like the very prejudiced jokes that they made. It does make mention of how the call shows the callous bias of the police, gives a second fatal dose of hydrochloric acid, and then that's when he's killed. So we go to May 28th of 91. He calls out of work, dismembers Hughes and synthesophone, keeps the skulls. It mentions how a woman called police for a follow-up, and how it's obviously the guy that the boy was with, so you should check him out. But for some reason, it doesn't mention that it was Glenda Cleveland, for whatever reason. Um, how at this point Dahmer wasn't even trying to not get caught. Pretty much saying he was totally cautionless. He wasn't even trying at this point. Being totally reckless. He was out of control. Completely giving into his urges, just letting his urges completely take over. June 30th, 91 in Chicago. It goes into how he went to a pride parade. He met Matt Turner, shows a real photo of him, an aspiring model. So he's more enticed by work than the cash. So he's brought back to Milwaukee, strangled and placed in a 57-gallon drum, head in the freezer. Mentions again Dahmer's fear of someone walking out the door and leaving him forever. July 5th of 91, Chicago. He stayed in Chicago for like a week, I think. 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger, no photo of him, but it goes into him as a person, how they met at a bar, they liked each other, his friends approved of Jeff, how he goes back to Milwaukee, lasts all weekend. It seems like they might even date long term, which Dahmer never had, so this is a very different feeling for him. Never had a relationship beyond a one-night stand or murder with anyone. But that's when Jeremiah says he has to go back to Chicago, and that's when everything snaps, and then he kills him. I don't remember if the Fresh Meat documentary went into Jeremiah Weinberger to this depth before. Like, oh, I actually like this guy. He seems to like me. And lasting all weekend with him. But, it's when he says he has to head back home. But hinting, I would like to see you again. It words it like it's too overwhelming, and that's when he snapped, killed him. He drugs him, does his zombie experiment, but this time with boiling water. So, and how that must be a sign that he's, one, trying different things with his experiments, but also like he really wanted this to work with him. Pamela Bass on going over and seeing him with Jeremiah, and how, I can't remember exactly how she worded it, but she saw Jeremiah and he was drugged, and how he kept like tugging on her arm, as if he wanted help, and she thought he was just drunk. It goes into how before Dahmer goes into work, he gives another dose of boiling water, but when he came home, Jeremiah was dead. According to Scott, the true crime writer, Dahmer regretted 3 victims. Stephen Hicks, who was an accident, Stephen Tuomi, which he doesn't remember, and Weinberger, who was just a nice guy. Now it shows the photo of him, how people notice his disappearance and put flyers around the gay bars in Milwaukee. How people would, I think it says, it's been so long since I watched this. This is why I don't like to watch a bunch of other things and then come back to this later on. Or maybe I could just take better notes. But I think it's they're referring to the friends of Weinberger. So they know Jeff, they know Milwaukee, and they know that's the place where men have gone missing. We get the audio reenactment about staying careful for years, but the last few months he went nuts. Mentions the smell getting worse, but when people complain to the building manager, and he went around the apartments. And he went around, the apartments, at least one other one, at least at least one other apartment, there was an unrelated dead body in it, like probably an overdose or something. So that kind of took the blame for the smell for a while. So that bought Dahmer some time. But it was a high crime area, so no one really thought anything of it. July 15th, 91, 23-year-old model and bodybuilder of Oliver Lacey shows a real photo of him. How Dahmer's on the verge of being fired for calling out so much. But he's so attracted to Lacey, he can't risk him leaving. And all he had was chloroform, and he knew that won't last a whole shift, so he strangled him, dismembered him, and kept his head in the fridge and heart in the freezer, along with the rest of his skeleton. Describes how eating the heart could represent him trying to consume the power of a person, almost like their soul. He's fired from his job, may lose his apartment. It's all coming undone for him. But as for his shrine, it says he's only one skull short of his overall plan. July 19th of 91, 25-year-old Joseph Bradoff shows a real photo of him. He's a father of 3. He's looking for work. He accepts $50 for photos. Drugged, strangled, how he's killing faster than he can dispose of, even showering with 2 dismembered bodies in his bathtub. But he can't stop. We get more of the 1991 audio reenactment. Saying in the last days, nothing gave him pleasure, just felt empty and frustrated, compelled to keep killing. How after losing his job, he knows he'll lose his apartment, and his altar and activities will soon be discovered. Which brings us to July 22nd of 91, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards shows a real photo of him. How Dahmer is desperate to find that one last victim, to get that one last skull for his shrine. And his desperation shows, and words that like his desperation shows, and people can see that in him, so that's why they're rejecting him. So to them, it looks like, oh, this guy at the bar is trying too hard to meet someone. That's kind of what it's saying. Until he meets Edwards, who's not from Milwaukee, which it does not mention that he's heterosexual. Most documentaries I see does not mention that he's a heterosexual. But it goes into his time at the apartment, how he noticed the smell. He doesn't drink, so he can't be drugged. He gets cuffed. He tries to keep his cool and assure Jeff that they're friends and that he won't leave. How it plays the I want to eat your heart quote. It mentions he was there for 4 hours. I always heard around 5 hours. How he manages to escape and get to police. How they find photos in the bedroom and a head in the fridge. Pamela Bass on seeing some of this going on through the crack of her door. Standing at her door and Jeff letting out an inhuman howl as he's being cuffed. We get more of the audio reenactment on feeling remorse, but not knowing why he doesn't feel more. The search of his apartment. Now we finally get real photos and footage, because for most of the documentary, it's pretty much been dramatizations, except for when they talk about a victim directly, then there'll be a photo of them. So now we get real photos, real footage. All news archive footage. Talks about the 3 torsos in the drum, the heads in the freezer, fridge, hearts, 2 skeletons, 7 skulls at least. In the bedroom, the mummified hands and genitals. In the filing cabinet, a full skeleton, painted skulls and a scalp, and more genitals. Goes into his interrogation. Dr. Berlin on meeting him for the first time, and how forthcoming and honest he was. Even the possibility of him being relieved that it's now over. He waited for police to arrive. He never took pride in killing. He would he wouldn't be compelled to keep killing. I don't know what I meant by that. Uh, 2 weeks and 60 hours worth of confession is what they ended up with. How he was honest and wanted to help the families by naming all 17 victims, even wanting to understand himself uh, and why he did these things. Again, breaks down how cannibalism is to consume the power of someone and they'll live on through him. And his altar is so he'll never be alone, they'll always be with him. It goes into the media explosion in the wake of his arrest, the birth of the Milwaukee Cannibal moniker. Pamela Bass talks about this. The civil rights outrage and movements against the police. With it does show footage of Jesse Jackson in Milwaukee. January 30th, 92, the trial begins. Has courtroom footage, audio reenactment saying he started this horror. Makes sense to put a complete end to it. Trial going into whether he's sane or not. How he didn't wear glasses during his trial so that he couldn't look anybody in the face. He could see the angry, grieving families. Dr. Berlin on what needs to be proven in Wisconsin in order to be found insane. Gerald Boyle, his the defense being that, or Gerald Boyle's defense being that necrophilia is a mental illness, a disease that he can't fight, so that's his insanity. Of course, he goes into more detail in the documentary than here in my notes. I'm still trying to be as vague as possible, but footage of Berlin on the stand and goes into how prosecutor Michael McCann argued that he was of sound mind and premeditated the murders. Clip of Tracy Edwards on the stand. Dr. Sherry Jin on how she doesn't think he was a true necrophiliac, as he had sex with the bodies immediately after death, like while they were still warm. It was more about the submissiveness rather than the fact that they were dead. How the shrine was used as evidence of insanity. Clip it. Oh, I already said that. Then it shows the sketch of his altar. So then it goes into the closing statements. We do get a bit of the closing statements. We get Shirley Hughes, the mother of Tony Hughes, J.D. Hagen, sister of Richard Guerrero, the mother of Curtis Strouder. Of course, it plays Rita Isbell, sister of Errol Lindsay, and her explosion. Inez Thomas, mother of David Thomas. Donald Bradoff, the brother of Joseph Bradoff. And then finally, Dahmer's closing statement. February 17th of 92, his sentencing. He's given 15 life sentences. You get all footage of that. May 1st of 92 in Summit County, Ohio, he gets a life sentence for Stephen Hicks. Doesn't show footage of that. Footage of Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Mentions how he got baptized and how people were skeptical about that. Dr. Berlin on believing that he was genuine about turning over to God. In 1993, he's moved to a less secure unit. He's no longer in solitary. Now he's in general population. He's given a work assignment. It does go into how a lot of inmates were pissed. They hated him. They felt he was treated like a rock star and got special treatment. And then finally, November 28th of 94, mentions how he was beaten to death by 25-year-old Christopher Scarver. We get a tiny little clip of Scarver. We're introduced to Marvin Tucker, who is a friend of Scarver, who says he was told that he had a broom, broke it, then used that to kill him. I've heard a broom was always in the gym that they were cleaning, but it was either a barbell or a weight bar that he was beaten with. So then it goes into the reaction of his death with news footage and or news interviews with random people saying how happy they are that he's dead. You get a clip of Rita Isbell's reaction, saying she's very happy that he was killed. Pamela Bass on her reaction when finding out he was killed. She actually says that she locked herself in a room and cried only because she felt that his life was wasted. Like he never found his everlasting love, and that he wasted his own life. Essentially grieving the friend that she had that ended up in prison. Um, Dr. Berlin on how it's important to learn from people like Dahmer, his mind, and how people develop sexuality and normal, abnormal sexuality to help prevent future Dahmers. Dr. Sherry Jin on the root of his activities being his longing for companionship, and the only way to get the kind of companion he wanted was to create one on his own. Shirley Lynn Scott on how we can't relate to serial killers, but Dahmer has just enough humanity to sympathize with his loneliness and his need for companionship. And finally, how Dahmer could be a mixture of nature and nurture. So that is Jeffrey Dahmer, Killer Cannibal. Yeah, sure, it does cover all the same things as every other Dahmer documentary. I'm still inclined to say that this one is my favorite and the best made one. However, and there's a bunch out there that all they do is just go chronologically and just tell you what happened and really get lost in the mix of everything. I would say this one is still very well made. It's very dramatization heavy, which is kind of a complaint, but they do back that up with the beginning of his life and after he was arrested, having plenty of photos and footage. Just that midsection, his murder spree, where there really isn't any photos or footage. So I get why there's dramatizations, but I do give it credit for really trying to break it down psychologically as much as possible, or as much as we could possibly understand. And yeah, our host is kind of a true crime writer. That's the Shirley Lynn Scott. But, so she kind of walks us through the whole story. But I I do give it credit for trying to break down, what everything from, what collecting dead animals, why and how, or what that means. Uh, Teenage alcoholism, how, why, what that means. Uh, the uh, Joyce and Lyle's divorce, how, why, what that. Literally everything, every aspect, all the way up until his death, and things since. Going a little bit more in depth with some of the victims. What were some of the last things the victims were doing? The escalation of his crimes. What victim did he start cannibalizing? What victim did he start doing his experiments? And where was he at mentally with it? So I do commend the documentary for at least attempting to do that. I would say that warrants its existence and warrants definitely a checking out, more so than other Dahmer ones I've seen. Like, I've never seen a bad Dahmer documentary. I'd probably say Fresh Meat was the closest, only because that one didn't really offer anything new. But I would say this one is probably the closest to the Dahmer tapes, only it might have a little bit more of like a psychological dissection, no pun intended. So that definitely makes it worth it. And these are not armchair psychologists that are breaking all this down, kind of like what Fresh Meat felt like. So it is well made. It is well done. They do get people that either really know their psychological work, or people that have actually worked with Dahmer and are actually have some credence as to what they're saying psychologically. I would say this one has the most psychological breakdown of the Dahmer story than any other one I've seen. I would still just say that this one's my favorite. So this one's definitely worth checking out. It It's a Reels documentary, but can be found on Tubi. So I think this is going to be the last Dahmer piece that I'll be reviewing. I think I had a couple more planned, but I'll just do those a little bit later. But anyway, so stay tuned for. I'm going to be having a couple Bundy things coming up, and then we'll see what happens. So stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.